Now, there's absolutely no doubt that many Muslims are the subject of racism because of their race. But a religion is not a race. Islam is a universal religion. And I think the use of the word racism is unhelpful and indeed counterproductive, quite apart from the fact that it's attempting to apply the racism label to a religious group.
Dominic, can we get one thing clear about this definition? Is it legally binding or not?
No, it's not legally binding. It has no statutory basis at all. It's a tool to enable government and those who want to refer to it to have a framework in which they can identify and try to address anti-Muslim hostility in this country, which is undoubtedly becoming more prevalent.
So what is the point of it? If it's not legally binding, why would anybody who is hostile to Muslims have the slightest interest in adopting it?
Well, somebody who's hostile to Muslims probably wouldn't have any reason to adopt it. But
presumably it's their behaviour you want to change, right?
It's their behaviour we want to change. And there's no doubt that one of the things we picked up as the working group was taking evidence is that lots of institutions have definitions of anti-Muslim hatred or indeed Islamophobia, which I think are undesirable and indeed may lead at times to proper complaints about restrictions on freedom of expression. So what we have actually crafted here is designed in part to address that. And we think that if it were to be widely adopted, then it does provide a useful framework for when people come along and say, we're facing a problem. Somebody rightly said, if you can't define the problem, you can't address it.
Well, I just wanted to get clear, though. I mean, it's a bit of a puzzle. I mean, give me an example of how this might be used in real world. What is it that somebody might say or do that this definition, that would cross the threshold of this definition and lead to some kind of sanction?
Two of the paragraphs in the definition really cover either criminal activity or unlawful discrimination carried out intentionally. The middle paragraph does, however, deal with the prejudicial stereotyping of Muslims or people perceived to be Muslims and treating them as a collective group defined by fixed and negative characteristics. Now, you take an institution, for example, an academic institution. It's a place where people must be free to have debate, must be free to criticize Islam, indeed to criticize cultural practices which they may associate with Muslims. But that's a different thing from trying to stir up hatred against people on the basis that they simply fit into a particular group which they say has negative characteristics. But the intention to stir up hatred must be there.
But I still don't quite get the concreteness of this. Let us say, for example, to take a parallel, I'm a Christian. And Richard Dawkins comes along and says, Christians, you're all bonkers. This is just stupid superstition. Is there a parallel here? Is Richard Dawkins going to would he fall foul of an analogous definition here? I'm trying to get what it is that is now prohibited.
Nothing here is prohibited, and he wouldn't fall foul of this at all. He would be able to say that quite freely, and he'd be able to say that quite freely about Islam as well if he wanted to. Frankly, the definition could just as easily be applied to any religious group. It's about treating people properly, and that is respecting them and not encouraging hatred against them.
Yeah, but Dawkins says I'm an idiot.
Irrespective of their actual opinions, beliefs, or actions.
But Dawkins says I'm an idiot for believing in the sky fairy. Well, that's pretty disrespectful.
It may be disrespectful, but we're entitled to be disrespectful in this country.
But in that case, the reason I'm asking this is, in that case, what is it that would actually transgress this definition? Can you give me a single example? In the real world?
I can give an example. If I were to say that, quite apart from the fact I dislike Islam and the culture of Muslims, I think that Muslims or individual Muslims should be hated, irrespective of their actual opinions, beliefs, or actions, and try to stir up hatred against them, that would be caught, even if it were not a criminal offence. And I would expect an institution, whether it was an employer or otherwise, to call the person in and say this is not acceptable. I think it does. I think the definition from that point of view, it can be helpful.
I'll tell you what the problem here is. In your inquiries, have you found a single example of anybody anywhere in a workplace going into the office and saying to their colleagues, I think we just ought to hate Muslims?
I'm afraid yes. And I also.
Oh, really? Where?
Well, in the course of the evidence we took, we had plenty of people who said that the casual abuse of Muslims, irrespective of their actual views, is becoming a very prevalent phenomenon.
No, but you didn't say casual abuse. You said somebody who says that they would hate a particular individual because they're Muslims or a group of Muslims. And I'm just asking you. I tell you why this is so important. It's important because unless you can say specifically what it is, what the behaviors are, then this now becomes an object of mystery. And actually what we've seen previously is that these definitions become the subject of dispute inside workplaces, inside universities, and they actually become more of a cause of disagreement and chaos and contestation than if they had not been there. I think that's the criticism that's being used here.
Well, that's a perfectly fair critique, but I happen to think it's misplaced. I think if you look at the definition and you look at what it's saying, it is perfectly possible to identify whether somebody is making a criticism of religion or of cultural practices, or is in fact intending to stir up hatred against somebody, encouraging it. And so I think that is a distinction which, in fact, individuals can make. But I think this provides a framework in which it can be made. I'm absolutely confident that it is not going to lead to examples of misuse by academic communities, as long as they actually follow what the guidelines show.
Okay, well, one of the things that I see that in this definition, you've dropped or you haven't entertained the suggestion which was contained in a previous definition that was circulating, that this was a kind of racism. I think that's interesting.
No. There was never a definition which had the word racism in it.
Well, I think the definition of Islamophobia circulated by the all-party parliamentary group some years ago did say it was a kind of, and that the Islamophobia was a kind of anti-Muslim racism.
That's not an earlier version of mine, Trevor.
No, I understand that.
The all-party parliamentary group definition undoubtedly had two things in it which I think are very controversial. One is the use of the term Islamophobia. The difficulty with the use of the term Islamophobia is it means very different things to different people. Doubtless to many Muslims, it means anti-Muslim hatred. But to many people, it's also, given its literal English meaning, means an irrational fear of Islam. Well, we're entitled to have irrational fears of religions or rational fears of them. And I think it was seen as being leading to the closing down of debate on subjects which are perfectly legitimate. The second one is about racism. Now, there's absolutely no doubt that many Muslims are the subject of racism because of their race. But a religion is not a race. Islam is a universal religion. And I think the use of the word racism is unhelpful and indeed counterproductive, quite apart from the fact that it's attempting to apply a racism label to a religious group.
Well, I think we can agree on that. So there's a law against racism. There's also a law against religious discrimination. And I think what you're saying is that this is a framework that people might use. I guess that the question that might be asked is it going to be more trouble than it's worth? The government's former anti-extremism czar, John Woodcock, told me yesterday that he's deeply concerned about the definition because he thinks it could be used by extremists to deflect scrutiny from their quest to undermine our values and intimidate Muslims. In essence, that I guess what Woodcock, or Lord Walney, as he now is, would be saying is that this definition, since it doesn't have statutory force, since it can be interpreted, will basically be the platform for arguments inside institutions by people of malign intent who don't share your, you're a generous-minded kind of guy, but they don't share your generosity of spirit, and they will use this to shut down other people's speech.
I can't rule out that anything can be used by malevolent people and try to twist it. And I also accept that this is a subject on which reasonable people may disagree as to whether you should have a definition at all. But the anti-Semitism definition we have has proved to be on balance useful, and I think this one will be too. And I don't share the view that there is some serious danger of its misuse. It's not to say that somebody may not try to misuse it, but I also think there are advantages to having it. And as I said at the beginning, one of the advantages is there are an awful lot of definitions out there, some of which I think actually do have that risk attached to them. And this, I believe, does not.
Lastly, as a matter of priorities, Dominic, the social cohesion strategy which the government's published today says in terms that the most pressing issue in terms of social cohesion is the threat from Islamist radicals. It mentions far right, but it says that that is the biggest threat. Is there a danger here of diverting attention from what is the real threat, Islamist radicalism, because the real threat here is threat from them rather than a threat to Islam? And by the way, the Office for National Statistics data on racial and religious incidents will show you, once you analyse it, that, for example, if you're Jewish, you're 10 times as likely to be subject to any kind of anti-Semitism as a Muslim is to be subject to any kind of anti-Muslim hostility. Are we getting our priorities right here?
Well, I actually think the priority is merged. I certainly share the view that Islamist radicalism is a serious threat in this country. And Islamist radicalism will grow if we also have an alienated general Muslim community who feel got at to the point where they actually feel a persecution complex. So, in fact, tackling those two things together is perfectly correct. And it seems to me on that the government's approach is right. I'm no way diminishing the threat of Islamist radicalism. And of course, it's driving a wedge in communities in this country because it's in part fueling great fear amongst non-Muslims. So it's an extraordinarily pernicious force, but all the more reason, therefore, that we should have in place something, a structure which also looks at the fact that Muslims in this country are suffering real and significant abuse in their daily lives. And that can't be ignored either and shouldn't be.
Dominic Grieve, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.